My unfaithful wife's boss came to my house and declared, "Your wife will now be mine because I am the real alpha male. You have to accept that and maybe I'll let you watch us." I got angry but let me tell you about it from the beginning. I stood in the kitchen, chopping vegetables, trying to shake off the tiredness of the day. Melanie was late again. Lately she'd been spending more and more time at work. And every time I asked her about it she just shrugged it off, telling me her boss Steve had been piling on projects. Part of me bought it. She was ambitious, always eager to prove herself. But another part of me, the part that got louder at night, gnawed at me with doubts I couldn't explain. The front door creaked open. I didn't even turn around. "You're home late," I said, tossing the chopped onions into the pan. Silence. I turned, expecting the usual half apology, half excuse. What I got instead was Melanie standing there, looking like she'd just walked through a hurricane. Her hair was a mess, makeup smeared, and there was a look in her eyes. A mix of guilt and something else. Something darker, something deliberate. "Raymond, we need to talk." Her voice was shaky, not her usual confident tone. My chest tightened. "About what?" She looked down at her hands, fisting her wedding ring nervously. She took a breath. And then her words tumbled out like an avalanche I couldn't stop. "Steve, he's been helping me. He's shown me things that I think can help us." "Help us?" I was confused and it showed. "What do you mean?" "I know this is going to sound crazy, but you need to hear me out." She stepped closer and I could see the tremble in her lip. "He's helped me explore a side of myself, a side I didn't know existed. A side that, well, it's different. It's powerful." "What the hell are you talking about?" I took a step back, the knife in my hand suddenly feeling heavier. "I've been submissive to him," she said, her voice dropping almost to a whisper. "In the dominant, submissive sense. He's been guiding me." There was a moment of silence where all I could hear was the sizzling of onions in the pan behind me. I couldn't process it fast enough. Her words crashed into me, each one heavier than the last. "You're joking." I finally said, my voice tight. "This is some kind of sick joke." "It's not," she said quickly, her eyes pleading with me. "I thought it was insane too at first. But Steve, he convinced me that it would help us, help me be a better wife to you." "A better wife?" I nearly laughed. "By sleeping with your boss." She winced at the bluntness of my words but didn't deny it. "It's more than that. It's not just about sex. It's about control, about dynamics. It's psychological." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My heart pounded in my chest, rage bubbling up inside me. "So what? You're telling me you've been screwing him because you think that's going to make things better between us?" Her eyes watered and she shook her head frantically. No, it's not like that. I didn't mean for it to go that far. It just happened. And now, I think you called. Could what? Watch. Is that where this is going?" My voice rose and I could feel the anger taking over. "You want me to sit there like some kind of creep and watch while he..." "No. I mean, maybe if you want to." She swallowed hard, as if she couldn't believe she was saying it out loud. "It's not what you think. It's about power, about breaking barriers. Steve says it could strengthen our marriage." "Strengthen?" I threw the knife down on the counter, the metal clattering loudly. "You're out of your mind, Melanie. You've been brainwashed. This is insane." Tears streamed down her face now, but I wasn't moved. I couldn't be. I felt like I'd just been stabbed in the gut. How could she think any of this made sense? That this was something she could even suggest at all? "Undo." "Raymond, I'm sorry. I never wanted to hurt you," she whispered. "Oh, but you did," I growled. "You did." The room felt claustrophobic, like the walls were closing in. I needed air, needed to get away from this madness. I turned and stormed out of the kitchen, my footsteps heavy on the floor. "Raymond, wait. Don't follow me," I snapped, grabbing my coat from the hanger by the door. "I need to think." I slammed the door behind me and marched down the street, the cool night air doing little to calm the storm raging inside me. My mind was spinning. Melanie, the woman I thought I knew, had been sleeping with her boss and expected me to be okay with it. And Steve. Oh, Steve, that smug, self-righteous bastard. I'd met him a few times at company functions, and he'd always had this air about him, like he knew something everyone else didn't. Now I knew what it was. He thought he owned Melanie. He thought he could own me too. The thought made my blood boil. I wasn't just angry, I was seething. How dare he? How dare he come into my life, my marriage, and think he could dictate the rules? And worse, how could Melanie let him? I paced the streets, my mind racing with questions, none of which had any answers. All I knew was that things were never going to be the same again. I don't know how long I walked that night. It felt like hours, but maybe it was just minutes. My mind was a mess, like someone had taken a wrecking ball to everything I thought I knew about my life. I was trying to piece it all together, trying to understand how the hell this had happened. But no matter how much I turned it over in my head, I kept coming back to the same sickening truth. Melanie had chosen this. Eventually, I ended up at a park a few blocks away from our house. It was one of those places we used to go together back when things were simpler, before Steve, before her submissive nonsense. The swings creaked in the wind, empty and ghostly in the pale streetlight. I sat down on a bench, staring at the ground. The anger had dulled, but now I just felt hollow. How could she do this? How could the woman I married, a woman I thought I loved, let herself get pulled into something so twisted? And worse, how could she expect me to go along with it? I pulled out my phone, almost on autopilot, and opened her message thread. I scrawled through our conversations from the past few weeks. Work updates, grocery lists, stupid memes. All normal, right? Like nothing was wrong. But now that I knew the truth, it was all tainted. Every word she'd said, every smile she'd given me, it was all a lie. The buzzing of my phone in my hand jolted me from my thoughts. It was her. Melanie, Raymond, please come home. We need to talk. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. Talk? What was there to talk about? She'd already laid it all out in the most bizarre, twisted way imaginable. What more could she say that I hadn't already heard? I shut off my phone without replying and shoved it into my pocket. I wasn't ready to face her. Not yet. I needed time to figure out what I was going to do next. Because this wasn't just something we could sweep under the rug. It wasn't something I could just forgive. Hours later, when I finally walked through the front door, the house was dark. For a moment, I thought maybe she'd gone to bed. Maybe she'd realized how screwed up everything was and had given me space. But then I heard her, sitting on the couch, curled up, her tears-streaked face lit only by the dim glow of the TV. She didn't say anything when I came in, just looked at me with those sad, broken eyes. I didn't feel sorry for her. Not anymore. All I felt was a cold emptiness that stretched between us like a canyon. I can't believe you thought this was okay, I said, my voice low, barely more than a growl. I leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, staring at her like she was a stranger. It's not about being okay, she said, sniffling, wiping her nose. I didn't plan for it to happen like this. Didn't plan for it. I laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that even surprised me. How exactly do you accidentally get involved with your boss like that? Was there a meeting I missed? She flinched, looking down at her hands, wringing them together like she always did when she was in Elvis. I didn't know how to tell you. I was scared. Scared of what? Scared that I might say something crazy like, hey, maybe don't sleep with your boss. Is that what you were afraid of? She winced, but I didn't care. I was past caring about how my words made her feel. She had made her choices, and now we were both living with them. Raymond, please, she whispered. It wasn't supposed to be like this. I thought it would make things better between us. I threw up my hands in disbelief. Better. How the hell does this make anything better? You think I want to live like this? You think I want to be some bystander while you and Steve play your little games? It's not a game, she shot back, her voice rising for the first time. It's not just about sex, Raymond. It's about control. It's about trust. Trust. I couldn't help but laugh again, shaking my head. You don't get to talk to me about trust. You gave that up the second you let him into our marriage. She fell silent, tears brimming in her eyes. But I wasn't moved. Not this time. I couldn't be. Look, I said, my voice softening just a fraction. I don't know what kind of brainwashing he's done to you, but this isn't how a marriage works. You don't fix things by blowing them up. She looked at me, her eyes desperate, like she was trying to reach out to me through the wreckage she caused. I didn't mean for it to go this far, Raymond. I just wanted something more. More, I repeated, my voice thick with disbelief. And you thought this was how you'd get it? She nodded, her tears flowing freely now. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I looked away, my fists clenching and unclenching at my sides. I could feel the anger simmering just beneath the surface, threatening to spill over at any second. I don't think I can do this anymore, I said quietly. Her breath hitched and she stood up from the couch, her face pale, panicked. Raymond, no. Please, we can fix this. We can work through it. I shook my head. I don't see how. Please, she begged, stepping closer. I'll leave Steve. I'll quit my job. We can start over, just you and me. Please, just give me a chance to make this right. I looked at her, really looked at her, and all I saw was betrayal. All I saw was the mess she'd made of our life. And I realized in that moment that there was no coming back from this. No matter what she said, no matter how sorry she was, the damage was done. Unfiling for divorce, I said the words cold and final. Her face crumpled, and she collapsed back onto the couch, sobbing. But I didn't go to see her. I couldn't. There was nothing left to save. The next few days were a blur of lawyers, paperwork, and packing. I didn't give her much time to get her things together. I wanted her out of the house, out of my life. Every time I saw her, it was like a knife twisting in my gut. She tried to talk to me, to apologize, to make me reconsider. But I was done listening. The moment she told me about Steve, the moment she tried to drag me into their sick little world, something inside me broke. And once it was broken, there was no fixing it. The last day she was in the house, she stood in the doorway, her bags packed, looking at me with those tearful eyes one more time. Raymond, she said softly. I'm sorry. I wish I could take it all back. I didn't answer. I just nodded and watched her walk out of my life. I thought that would be the end of it. I thought once she was gone, I could start putting my life back together. But Steve had other plans. It was a couple of weeks after Melanie left. I was sitting in the living room, going over some paperwork for the divorce, when there was a knock on the door. I frowned, not expecting anyone, and went to answer it. When I opened the door, there he was, Steve. Smug as ever, standing there like he owned the place. What the hell are you doing here? I growled. He smiled, that infuriating, condescending smile that made my blood boil. I thought we should have a chat, man to man. There's nothing to talk about, I snapped, starting to close the door in his face. But he stuck his foot in the door, forcing it open again. Oh, I think there is. I stepped back, reluctantly letting him in. You've got 5 minutes. Then I'm calling the cops. Steve sauntered into the living room, looking around like he was assessing the place. Like he belonged here. It made me sick to my stomach, just seeing him in my house. You know, he began casually, Melanie told me you'd react like this. All emotional, all heartbroken. But I think you're missing the bigger picture here. Bigger picture? I scoffed. The only picture I see is you screwing my wife behind my back. He shrugged as if it was nothing. You think this is about sex? It's not. It's about power. Control. You think you're the alpha in this situation, but you're not. I clenched my fists, my knuckles turning white. Get to the point, Steve. What do you want? I want you to understand your place, he said, stepping closer, his eyes narrowing. Melanie belongs to me now. You had your chance, but you blew it. Now you can either accept that and deal with it, or you can make this a lot harder on yourself. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. It was the kind of laugh that came from disbelief, because this guy couldn't be serious, right? But the way he stood there, all self-assured and smug, told me he was dead serious. Accept it? Are you out of your mind? I spat. You think I'm going to sit back and let you take over my life? You think I'm just going to roll over and let you have my wife? She's not your wife anymore, he said with a smirk. She's mine. And deep down you know that's how it's supposed to be. That was it. I snapped. My vision blurred red. And before I knew it, I had him by the collar, shoving him against the wall. His cocky expression faltered for a split second, but it was enough to fuel my rage. "You don't come into my house and talk to me like that," I growled, my face inches from his. "You don't get to tell me what's supposed to be." He smirked again, though I could see the flicker of fear in his eyes. "You're just proving my point, Raymond. You're out of control. You're weak. And that's why Melanie chose me." I slammed him against the wall harder, my hands shaking. "He shut your mouth. Or what?" he taunted, his voice laced with arrogance. "You're going to hit me. Go ahead. It'll just prove how pathetic you are." I stared at him. My fists clenched so tight I could feel my nails digging into my palms. Part of me wanted to just end it right there. Punch him so hard, he'd never be able to smack at me again. But another part of me knew that's exactly what he wanted. He wanted me to lose control, to give him the upper hand. And I wasn't going to give him that satisfaction. Instead, I let go of his collar and stepped back, staring at him. "Get the hell out of my house." Steve straightened his jacket, smoothing out the wrinkles where I'd grout him. "I'm not going anywhere, Raymond. You can throw me out today, but Melanie will come back to me. She always does." I wanted to punch him so badly, but I knew that would only make things worse. Instead, I walked past him, grabbing my phone off the table. "You've got 10 seconds to get out before I call the cops." He shrugged like this was all just some game to him, and started walking toward the door. "Fine, Raymond. But you should know I've got a good lawyer. So when she takes you for everything in the divorce, don't come crying to me." I slammed the door behind him so hard the windows rattled. My chest heaved with anger, adrenaline pumping through my veins. I wanted to scream, to break something, anything to release the tension boiling inside me. But instead I just stood there, fists clenched, trying to calm the storm raging inside. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The next few days were a blur of meetings with my lawyer, filling out paperwork and trying to wrap my head around the mess that was my life. Melanie was staying with a friend, or at least that's what she told me. Honestly, I didn't care where she was anymore. The divorce couldn't come fast enough. But Steve, he wasn't going away quietly. He sent texts, he called, he even showed up at my office once. But I had security throw him out before he could get past the front desk. He was relentless, like he had something to prove. Like he needed me to accept that he was in control. But there was no way in hell I was going to let him win. One night, after another long day of dealing with divorce proceedings, I sat on the couch, staring at my phone. I'd been avoiding Melanie's texts, but one had come in earlier that I couldn't ignore. "Melanie, I want to talk, please, just one last time before we finalize everything." I knew I shouldn't. I knew there was nothing she could say that would change my mind. But some part of me, a stupid masochistic part, needed closure. I needed to hear her say it one more time. I needed to know why she had done this. So, I texted back. "Raymond, fine, tomorrow. Noon at the house." The next day I sat in the living room, waiting for her. My stomach was in knots, my hands trembling slightly as I stared at the clock. Noon came and went, and for a brief fleeting moment I thought maybe she wouldn't show. Maybe she'd realize there was nothing left to say. But then the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find her standing there, looking different. She wasn't disheveled like the last time I'd seen her. Her hair was neatly done, and she wore a simple, modest dress. But it was her eyes that caught my attention. Red-rimmed, tired and sad. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. "Raymond," she said softly, stepping inside. I didn't say anything, just gestured for her to sit down. She hesitated for a moment before taking a seat on the couch, wringing her hands in her lap. For a long time we just sat there in silence. I didn't know how to start. I didn't even know if I wanted to. But eventually she spoke. "I don't know where to begin," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Try the beginning," I said, my voice cold, detached. "Why, Steve? Why? All of this?" She looked down at her hands, her lips trembling. "I was unhappy, Raymond. I didn't know how to talk to you about it. I didn't know how to fix it. So, you thought sleeping with your boss was the solution." She flinched, tears welling up in her eyes. "I didn't plan for it to happen. I needed something. I needed to feel something." And Steve, he offered that. He made me feel wanted. Wanted? I repeated, shaking my head in disbelief. You were married, Nanny. I wanted you. I chose you. Was that not enough? It wasn't about you, she sobbed, her voice cracking. It was never about you. It was about me. I was lost, Raymond. I didn't know who I was anymore. So, you threw away our marriage to find yourself. She looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. I didn't mean to. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I stood up, pacing the room, trying to process what she was saying. But it didn't make sense. None of it made sense. I didn't understand, I said, my voice raw. How could you do this? How could you throw everything away for him? It wasn't just about him, she said, her voice hoarse. It was about control. About feeling like I had some kind of power in my life again. Steve, he made me feel like I was in control. I stopped pacing, staring at her. Control? Is that what this was about? You wanted control? She nodded, sniffling. I didn't know how to get it any other way. I was so lost, Raymond. So confused. I sank back onto the couch, my head in my hands. I don't know if I can forgive you, Marnie. I don't know if I want to. She didn't say anything, just sobbed quietly, her shoulders shaking. And for the first time since this whole nightmare began, I felt sorry for her. Not because of what she did, but because she was so broken, so lost, that she thought this was the only way to fix her life. But that didn't change the fact that she had destroyed ours in the process. Unfiling for divorce, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. There's no coming back from this. She looked up at me, her face crumpled with grief. I know, she whispered, her voice shaky. I understand. We sat there in silence for what felt like an eternity. The weight of everything unsaid hung in the air between us, but there was nothing left to say that could change anything. The damage had been done, and no amount of apologies could undo it. Finally, Melanie stood up, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. I'll leave now. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry for everything. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. I watched her walk toward the door, and as she reached for the handle, she paused, turning back to look at me one last time. I hope one day you'll find peace, Raymond, I really do. And with that, she was gone. The house felt emptier than ever after she left. The silence was deafening, and for the first time in a long while, I realized how alone I truly was. But maybe that was a good thing. Maybe I needed to be alone to finally heal. After that final gut-wrenching conversation with Melanie, the divorce proceedings moved faster than I could have imagined. In the beginning, I had braced myself for a long, drawn-out battle, expecting her to fight tooth and nail over every little detail. Whether it was about the house, the finances, or the belongings we had accumulated over the years, I thought there would be arguments, accusations, or at least some resistance on her part, especially after everything we had been through. But to my surprise, Melanie didn't put up a fight. She didn't contest anything. When the papers were drawn up, it was almost as if she wanted to speed through the process just as much as I did. Maybe it was a kind of silent acknowledgement that we had reached the point of no return, that there was no sense in dragging out the inevitable. Or perhaps she was simply too emotionally exhausted to fight anymore. After all, this was the same woman who had claimed to want control over her life, but now she seemed to relinquish it without a word of protest. Whatever her reasons, she agreed to the terms without hesitation. And our discussions, which I had anticipated being tense and hostile, turned out to be surprisingly civil. There was no bitterness in the division of our assets, no underhanded moves or illegal tricks. We both knew what was fair, and we both agreed to split things evenly, something that felt oddly surreal given the emotional wreckage we were standing in. The house, the car, our savings, everything was divided without much fuss. Even the smaller, more personal things like the furniture and the sentimental items we had gathered over the years were dealt with calmly. It was like we were both just too tired to care anymore, like we were two people working through a checklist, rather than a couple tearing apart the life they had built together. I remember sitting in the lawyer's office, signing paper after paper, and thinking about how strange it was at the end of a marriage. Something that had once been filled with passion, love, and promise could feel so procedural, so motionless. And then there was Steve. As for him, his presence or lack thereof was just as predictable as everything else had become. From the beginning, I knew his involvement in this whole situation wouldn't last. It was clear from the moment he strutted into our lives that he was nothing more than a temporary storm, a disruption that would pass as soon as he got what he wanted. And true to form, Steve didn't stay in the picture for long. He was gone before the ink on our divorce papers had even dried. I didn't have to ask Melanie what had happened between them. I wasn't interested in the details of their relationship, nor did I care to hear whatever excuse or justification she might have offered. But through the grapevine I heard bits and pieces about their falling out. It wasn't long after our divorce was finalized that they called it quits. It was almost laughable in a way, how predictable the whole thing had been. Steve, the so-called alpha male, had swooped in, caused chaos, and then disappeared just as quickly. I imagined it was a matter of time before he got bored, lost interest, or simply moved on to his next conquest. Because that's what men like him do. The breakup, from what little I heard, seemed to be just as abrupt and cold as his entrance into our lives had been. Maybe Melanie had finally seen him for what he truly was, or maybe he realized that the thrill of the affair wasn't enough to keep him around. Whatever the reason, the end of their relationship came with the same lack of substance it had been built on. There were no fireworks, no dramatic scenes, just another relationship that burned out quickly and faded into nothingness. In the end, Steve had been nothing more than a symptom of the problems in our marriage, not the cause. And once he was gone, all that was left was the wreckage of what Melanie and I had once been. As for me, life went on. Slowly, painfully, but it went on. I threw myself into work, focused on rebuilding what had been torn apart. I started seeing a therapist, trying to make sense of everything that had happened, trying to find closure in a situation that had none. It took time, longer than I cared to admit, but eventually I started to feel like myself again. The anger, the hurt, the betrayal, they didn't go away completely, but they dulled over time. And I learned to live with them. Melanie and I didn't keep in touch. There was no reason to. Our lives had diverged, and whatever we had once shared was now a distant memory.